Shalom, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for Was Moses a Prophet or a Rabbi with Dr. Jonnie Schnytzer. We're so excited to learn with you all today and want to thank Temple Chai for co-sponsoring today's class. I'd love to tell you a little bit more about our speaker today, who's a regular at VBM, but for those of you who are learning with Dr. Schnytzer for the first time, he is probably the only PhD in Jewish philosophy focusing on medieval Kabbalah who can say that he once beat the head of Israeli Naval Commandos in a swimming race. His dissertation focused on the scientific Kabbalah of Rabbi Joseph ben Shalom Ashkenazi. Jonnie's forthcoming book is about Ashkenazi's Kabbalah as well as a critical edition of the Kabbalist's majestic commentary on Sefer Yesira. Jonnie's also the author of a Mossad thriller, The Way Back, which paints a picture of contemporary Israel. Jonnie also orchestrated the publishing of an English edition of the Hitler Haggadah, an important piece of Moroccan Jewish history from the Holocaust. Jonnie has also taken on several leadership roles in the Jewish world, including advisor to the CEO of Birthright and executive manager with StandWithUs. He lectures on a wide variety of topics relating to Judaism and Israel, especially about the untold stories and unspoken heroes of Jewish history. Jonnie is happily married with 4 gorgeous little kids, lives in Israel, and thinks that Australian rules football is the greatest sport ever invented. Dr. Schnytzer, thank you so much for being with us again.
Thank you very, very much. So good afternoon, everyone. Before I share the slides, if someone was to see the title of this talk without what we're going to talk about, just this idea of, was Moses a rabbi or a prophet? This seems like a bit of an odd question, and I doubt that anyone would take it to the region of Ethiopian Jewry and its relevance. And so I want to give a bit of context. I think it's safe to say that this question of what it means to be Jewish, and this is a question that both in Israel and abroad, this is a very simple question to ask and a very complicated one to answer. It's multifaceted and has many different answers. I'm going to begin with the bottom line. The claim here is going to be very simple, that the case of that Ethiopian Jewry can be viewed or should be viewed as the Hebrews of the Jewish people. And what I mean when I say that, the actual word Hebrew, Ivri, is the one on the other side. It's that if I'm doing this, then they're doing something else. And what we need to understand is that when we often think of what it means to be Jewish, we're not aware. And I'm thinking of the 3 main streams or 4 streams in Judaism: Orthodoxy, Reform, Conservative, even Reconstructionists, are all deeply rooted in the in what one might call the Talmudic revolution, the rabbinic revolution. You might like the rabbis, you might not like the rabbis. If you're one of these groups, if you do not come from Ethiopia, I can assure you, you think, breathe, read texts like a rabbinic Jew. And we're going to get into what that means in a moment. And just to highlight this, right, one of the biggest jokes of them all is that, we've even come to call Moses Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe the rabbi. And we know that in the Bible, Moshe was never a rabbi. Now, Ethiopian Jewry, as we're about to see, is a fascinating case study because Ethiopian Jews, according to tradition, arrive in Ethiopia sometime between First and Second Temple. We'll get into that in a moment. And what that means is that all we have is the Bible or the 24 books, and we don't have the Talmud. And that means we don't have the rabbis. And that means we don't have this elaboration of an oral tradition. And that means that Moses never became a rabbi. Moses has always stayed a prophet. And we're going to focus in our time together on 3 fundamental aspects of the difference between Jews that call Moses a prophet and Jews that call Moses a rabbi. We are going to begin by looking at the history, the first fundamental aspect, and we are going to see how what we understand in Jewish history radically changes when we understand Ethiopian Jewish history. So we're going to look at history. And then we're going to look at a story. We're going to learn about a story told by Ethiopian Jews and a story told by, or a Hasidic tale And I'm going to let you decide what is the relationship between the two stories and what we can learn about this, between what it means to be Jewish and why Ethiopian Jewry is of the utmost importance. And the final thing we're going to do is we're going to get a taste of a very profound medieval text from the Ethiopian Jewish bookshelf. I gather no one here, maybe someone here has read a bit of it, Tazaz Senbat, the Law of Sabbath. We're going to look into an old midrash, with beautiful midrash in which Shabbat, the Queen Shabbat, comes to life. And we're going to summarize about what this perhaps means today when we think about what it means to be Jewish. As I said, we're going to begin with a bit of history. We're going to begin with what we know about Ethiopian Jewry in a nutshell, and we're going to see in a fascinating kind of way how the plot thickens very, very quickly. In a nutshell, if we had to describe history, and this is something that we know. So what do we know superficially? We know that in the mid-19th century, European Jewry become aware through different scholars, non-Jewish scholars that are roaming around Ethiopia, and they hear about these Ethiopians that keep Sabbath and circumcise themselves, and they say they're Jewish, and the Jewish world, quote unquote, hears about Ethiopian Jewry. And there was a very famous rabbi in Germany, Azriel Hildesheimer, who said, we need to send a delegation, and because this is like, there's all this talk of maybe it's one of the lost 10 tribes. I'm just going to say in brackets, the lost 10 tribes is synonymous to when the Messiah is coming in Jewish history. Like it's one of those precursors ever since the time of Don Yitzchak Abravanel, Spanish expulsion time, that kind of finding 10 tribes is a very sensitive topic and of the utmost importance. So we hear of these Jews, we never knew that they existed, and then a delegation is sent. And the question is who heads this delegation? And it's a scholar in the Sorbonne by the name of Yosef Halevi, who speaks Ge'ez and Amhari, and he heads the delegation. And I'm just fast forwarding. If this happens in the mid-19th century, so it'll still take over 100 years until the 1980s to kickstart this IDF-powered operation to bring Ethiopian Jews to Israel. And I will just add, before we really get into the gist of it, that one of the greatest tragedies when we think of the Jewish education system worldwide, but for sure in Israel, is that 2 pages are dedicated to learning about Ethiopian Jewry when you do your finish high school. And those 2 pages are essentially about how the state of Israel brought Ethiopian Jewry to Israel, and not a single word is dedicated, to the best of my knowledge, abroad or in Israel in education systems, to what we can learn from Ethiopian Jewry about what it means to be Jewish. And my goal in our time together is that it'll be very, very clear. So Yosef Halevi, the scholar who heads to Ethiopia, comes back 1867. This is what he writes. This is a little snippet. The life of deprivation disappears on the Sabbath, for it is forbidden to fast on the Sabbath or to dwell excessively on mundane matters. Then the wrinkles between the eyes vanish, sorrow fades away, and happiness regains over all. There is no other place where the Sabbath rest brings such blessed results as in Ethiopia. The Sabbath is therefore observed among the Falashas, the Jews, with greater strictness than anywhere else. Falash, by the way, literally in Amhari means, it's like saying Hebrew. It's those from the other side. It's the ones that crossed over. And so the big question mark that Yosef Halevi has and that we have is, we meet a group or a Jewish community in Ethiopia, mid-19th century, that to the best of all of our knowledge has been completely detached from the rest of the Jewish world. It has been completely detached from an oral tradition called the Mishnah and Talmud, which one could argue has been the most, in fact, it's factual, it has been the most stable Jewish revolution, 2,000 years and kicking, the rabbinic revolution. Without this, they're still keeping Shabbos, and their Shabbos is awesome. How does that happen? And is that something we should or want to be tapping into? So let's now go back. Let's now try and understand in sort of our first act of our 3 acts, history, story, and text. Let's try and understand what we can learn from Ethiopian Jewish history. And here I have to add in an important caveat, a very important caveat. If you were to ask today's scholars on a scholarship on Ethiopian Jewry, it's a very sensitive topic. There are views to here and there. There is, for example, Stephen Kaplan. Professor Stephen Kaplan will be the sort of representative who will come and say, what we're about to read, I'm not sure I have definitive historic proof over. It's hearsay. It's what Jews have said. I'm not sure. Do I really know that Ethiopian Jews have always been there since First or Second Temple? Or what Kaplan agrees on is that in the medieval era, you have a group that start calling themselves Jews, because we have proof of that. And we'll get into that in a moment. So there is that one such view. And then there are a few other views. And the best way for me to provide you with the other views is by what one of the most prominent spiritual leaders of Ethiopian Jewry of the last century had to say in an oral recording on where Ethiopian Jews come from. So this is, and the reason, by the way, this is very important is because the usual story, if I ask you, what does it mean to be Jewish? 2,000 years diaspora. We think of the exiled Jew, the wandering Jew. We think of pogroms. It's Nebuchi. That's sort of what it is. And we're about to discover, pardon my French, a sort of kick-ass version of Jewish history that's very different from anything that we know. So what does Qes Uri ben Baruch in a recorded testimony from 1970-73? We're going to start with the end, because I know what you're wondering. Okay, so someone thinks this in the 1970s. We're going to go back to the medieval era and to the 10th century to testimonies and see if we can link them together. So, the history of the Falashas, it began as far back as the destruction of the First Temple. At that time, many Jews were exiled to Babylon and Egypt. This we know, right? And a large Jewish community arose in Alexandria, which also we know historically. The Jews participated in trade and maritime commerce and were also engaged in various crafts. The Jewish community in Egypt supported the Ptolemaic rulers, especially Cleopatra. However, after her death and the death of her Roman husband Antony, later Augustus, took control of Egypt. He persecuted the Jews because of their support for Cleopatra. Some of them, led by the high priest On, left Egypt. Some went to Yemen, others to Sudan. The latter group, meaning from Sudan, continued their migrations until they reached Ethiopia. They are our ancestors, the Falasha. So according to Qes is like the high priest, Qes Uri ben Baruch, we're talking about Jews from after the destruction of the First Temple. They get to Egypt, this is known, and then one of the groups that are then dispersed after the fall of Cleopatra and the rise of Augustus, one of the groups gets to Sudan. From Sudan, they continue and get to Ethiopia. And that explains also then the name Falashas, because literally this group of Jews coming from Sudan, coming from Egypt, coming from Israel are the outsiders. The exiles from Egypt entered Ethiopia via 2 routes, and at the meeting point of these 2 groups, they founded the city of Aksum. Many years later, Aksum became the capital of the Solomonic dynasty. When he says here Solomonic dynasty, he does not refer to King Solomon dynasty, but he's referring to a medieval Jewish kingdom that fought against other Ethiopian kingdoms and won battle after battle, and Jews lived in independent sovereignty in Ethiopia for hundreds of years. So this is Uri ben Baruch. This is a Qes, and this, by the way, isn't just Uri ben Baruch. You meet any Qes in Israel today, this is the sort of party line amongst Ethiopian Jewry. Now, we're going to see in a moment that the plot thickens, that there are a few other variations. But by and large, as someone like Stephen Kaplan might say, or might argue that we're not sure this isn't the case, you could be talking about an Ethiopian tribe of non-Jews that become Jewish, or you have here the general story, which is we are talking about Jews that arrive in Ethiopia. And you have today rabbis like Rabbi Yoel Bin-Nun and many others. I can't remember another prominent one, but that essentially this is the view that they go with, and one of the reasons has to do with the way Ethiopian Jews keep Sabbath. We're going to see this in a moment, and how this connects to the sages and texts that were kept in Israel around the time of the first temple and after. He continues, we arrived in Ethiopia before the Amhara and the Tigrayans, not to mention the Gala tribe. So we're one of the earliest tribes to get to Ethiopia, the Falasha, the Jews. At the time, Ethiopia was inhabited by Kushite tribes such as the Agau and Semitic tribes such as the Habesha, Agaz, and Sabaean. Right, so you have different Arab Bedouin tribes and a few African tribes, but essentially the claim or the tradition, according to Uri ben Baruch, is that Ethiopian Jews are of the first to sort of cultivate the culture. These tribes were very primitive and ignorant regarding the advanced arts of the time, which made it easy for the Falashas, the Jews, who came from the cultural center of the East, Egypt, to settle in. They became the unofficial rulers of the region and had a significant influence on the cultural advancement of local inhabitants. It seems that there were peaceful and harmonious relations between the Falashas, who were also already called Beta Israel, right? Bet Israel, Am Israel, the people of Israel, by the local population. When the Beta Israel group arrived in Ethiopia, it consisted mainly of men, and due to the lack of Jewish women, they married local women such as the women of the Agau tribe. So here, interestingly, we have an explanation to, it's funny. Usually, when you think of Jews, we have this self-perception of what many Jews look like in Europe or in America, and we never really think that Moses looked more like a Middle Easterner or like an Ethiopian Jew. There's a midrash that Moses was the king of Ethiopia for a few decades. And so here, Uri ben Baruch is responding to a very good question, and that is, if Jews were not Ethiopian, they didn't look Ethiopian, how does that happen? And he says, very simple. It was mainly the men that came from Sudan to Ethiopia, and there were no Jewish women, but they came with their Yiddishkeit, and so they married, and the assumption is that then there was the women became Jewish, and the rest is history. We're about to learn now from our next story how exactly you get a group of males and why it's males that are coming to Ethiopia. So here we close the curtain on the testimony or part of the testimony of Qes Uri ben Baruch. And I could have told this to you, but I wanted to bring his words because my assumption is if you don't see it here, we're never going to see it. So this is Uri ben Baruch, and this is the 70s. We're now going to go back. I want to do this, sort of quickly so that we have time for all of our different stops. We're going to now shift to the 10th century. There is a book called Eldad the Denite. What's the story? There is a genre. If you look at the Jewish bookshelf, there are different genres. You have Jewish rulings, right? Jewish law. You have Midrash. You have philosophy. You have Kabbalah. And one of the genres on the Jewish bookshelf is travelogues. We've always had Jews, not many, but we've had several, that at some point can't sit down and they got to go and find other Jews, possibly look for the lost 10 tribes, and they write about their escapades. And one such Jew was a man by the name of Eldad, who is roaming Africa, roaming Europe, the Middle East in the 10th century. He writes a travelogue, which then is printed. And we're going to read a few bits there about what his take on it is on who are these people that are in Ethiopia. So what does he say? And now we shall recount, our brothers, tribes of Jeshurun, the story of Eldad the Denite, who tells us this, how he journeyed through all the lands, being descendant from the tribe of Dan, and how God performed a great miracle for him and saved him in many places. This is how I departed, right? It's like many of these Jewish travelogues. There are a lot of moments where he's almost about to die. God comes in, saves him, right? Line comes and miraculous. But it's going to become very important for us because he's going to add in the between the lines of what Kesuri ben Baruch has not told us. And in our land, we say and hold as a tradition that you, the exiled ones, are from the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. So that's to say that it's accepted that today in the Jewish world, every Jew you meet is from the tribe of Benjamin and Judah. And this goes back to sort of, medieval era where this is kind of the idea. And it even goes back to the book of Chronicles and Ezra and others that talk about the dispersion of the Jews. And it's basically the tribes of Judah or Judah and Benjamin that stuck together, and the rest were dispersed, and we don't know where the others are. So we, the sort of Jews of Judah and Benjamin, under the faith of idolatry in the impure land, scattered under Rome, who destroyed our temple. May the Greeks and Ishmaelites, may their swords pierce their own hearts, and may their bows be shattered. And we have a tradition handed down from person to person that we, the sons of Dan, notice there's an association here with the tribe of Dan, were originally in the land of Israel, dwelling in tents. So he's going back to the biblical times and saying, once upon a time, Dan was it in Israel on the shores, and right where Tel Aviv is today, that's where Dan was. That's why it's called Gush Dan. And at some point, something happened. Among all the tribes of Israel, there were no warriors as mighty as us. But when Jerovam, the son of Nevat, who caused Israel to sin, rose and made 2 golden calves, the kingdom of the house of David was divided. We know about the split, and whoever doesn't, go read about it. We know the split between the kingdom of David, the kingdom of Judah, and the kingdom of Israel, this tragic split. And all of a sudden, when there's a split, the question is who's stronger, and how can one kingdom rule over the other? The tribes gathered and said, rise and fight against Yerovam and Jerusalem. Right? The tribes of Israel say, let's go get the Davidic dynasty. They've gone off astray. They replied, why should we fight against our brothers and the sons of our Lord David, king of Israel and Judah? Heaven forbid, heaven forbid. At that moment, the elders of Israel said, right? The elders, the ones in charge. There is no tribe in all of Israel like the tribe of Dan, the mighty warriors. They're the ones we need to do the job for us. They're the ones we need to cut off the throats of the Judans. Immediately they said to the sons of Dan, rise and fight against the sons of Judah. They answered, by the life of the head of the son of our father, we will not wage war against our brothers, nor will we shed their blood. At once, the sons of Dan took their swords, spears, and bows, and were ready to face death in leaving the land of Israel. For we saw that we could not remain. We said, let us go and find rest and a place. In the end, they decided to go to Egypt in order to cross the Pishon River into the land of Cush. What we're told here is a very tragic story. That the beginning of the story of Ethiopian Jewry, right, because this is a group that ends up in Egypt that then gets to Sudan and then Cush, Ethiopia, is that the time-old tension within the Jewish people caused almost a civil war, and the tribe of warriors said, it's not going to be us that are going to create the civil war. So we're putting down our weapons and we're leaving. And these are the males that in Uri ben Baruch's tradition are the ones that get to Sudan. Why are they males? Because they're the warriors, and they're the ones that left, and they told their wives and children, you stay in Israel. We're the ones in trouble. We're the ones leaving. You're going to stay because we don't know where we're going. And they sustained, this is according to the Ethiopian Jewish tradition. And this, by the way, is Eldad the Denite, meaning this is a text that has survived, 10th century text, that according to this, one associates the beginnings of Ethiopian Jewry with these warriors that didn't want to create a civil revolution in biblical times in Israel. Okay. I want to now fast forward to the 15th century. And in the 15th century, I'm going to bring testimonies of 2 of the most prominent Italian rabbis. what they have to say about this topic, because in two instances they were asked about these Jews. As we will see, it's not that Ethiopian Jews have been completely isolated. At times, some of them arrive in Egypt, get somewhere else, and Jewish people start asking, so who are these people? So this is a letter of Rabbi Eliyahu of Ferrera, a prominent Rav in Ferrera, in 1437. It seems to me that I have already informed you about what a young Jewish man told me regarding the people of his place. These people are masters of themselves and are not under the authority of others. Around them is a large nation called the Chabasha, who are Christians and make the sign of the cross on their faces. They are constantly at war with them, though only at times. These Hebrews have their own unique language, which is neither Hebrew nor Arabic. He's referring to Qes. They possess the Torah and an oral commentary on it, but do not have the Talmud or our legal rulings poskim. I questioned him because, right, he meets two of these Jews from this place. So he, as a good rabbi, a rabbinic Jew, like we all think, he asks him questions. I questioned him about several mitzvahs, and in some cases, their practices align with ours, while in others, they are closer to the views of the Karaites. They have the book of Esther, but not Chanukah. They are distant from us by a journey of 3 months, and in their land is the Gozan River. Now, this is fascinating because this is a leading rabbinic figure in the 15th century, and it really is a story that coincides with what we hear from Eldad the Denite in the 10th century and with Uri ben Baruch, because the Eldad the Denite tells us, look, the origin of this tribe is people you don't want to mess with. They're in charge of their own, they're warriors. So what happens when warriors get to a different land? They take charge. And we're told here that until the 15th century, yeah, the Christians are trying to get at them, but they're keeping their ground. And they're not mixing, they're their own, they have their own language, not Hebrew, not Arabic. And what's interesting is there is already a clear awareness. The Talmud has gone over their head, that they missed the boat, that the ship already sailed. Ethiopian Jewry or the Danite tribe already gets to Ethiopia. They don't, this culture of a question-asking Jew, which the Talmud is full of, they don't have it. And the reason he says he thinks they're like Karaites, because when all you have is the Torah, then a lot of times you stick to a literal meaning of what you need to do. And so this rabbi doesn't know, what are you? Are you this, you're that, you're something I don't know of. I think you're kosher, but I'm not sure. Let's move on to another prominent rabbi, an even more prominent rabbi. And now we are going to move on towards the end of the 15th century, 1488. Rabbi Ovadia of Bartanura, right, one of the greats, wrote a very prominent, important commentary on the Mishnah. Indeed, what has become clear to me and what I know without doubt is that on one of the borders of the kingdom of the Philistine Loani, likely referring to Ethiopia, a land of mountains and hills, and the mountains are very rugged and said to stretch for 10 days' journey, there without a doubt dwell the children of Israel. They have 5 leaders or kings, and it is said that for over 100 years they fought great and mighty wars with the Philistine Loani. In the end, due to sins, the hand of the Christians prevailed against them, striking them with a great and terrible blow. They entered their lands, destroyed and devastated them, and nearly erased the memory of Israel from those places. The survivors were subjected to severe decrees meant to force them to abandon their religion, similar to the decrees that the Greek kingdom imposed during the time of the Hasmoneans. Now, this is wild. This is absolutely wild. What we've just been told here, and this is chilling, is that up until the mid-15th century, if an Ashkenazi or a European Jew meets an Ethiopian Jew, their internal view, perception of what Jewish history is, has nothing to do with one another. The Ethiopian Jew, kingdom of Judah. I'm the master of my land, and yet I wait, as we will see in a moment, to get back to Zion. But until then, no one messes with me. But something then happens. End of 15th century, they can no longer hold on to the fort, and the Christians take over. And at this point, the pogroms begin. From the medieval era, from 15th century, Ethiopian Jewry essentially transform from an autonomous kingdom in Ethiopia to what we know around the Jewish world, which is essentially the Nebuch Jew, which has his oral traditions, and something has to happen. And we'll see in a moment a revolution occurs, a spiritual awakening that allows Jews in Ethiopia to be proud of who they are, even if you don't have a strong army. And it's this revolution, this spiritual revolution in the 15th century, which already we do have historic documentation for, which is perhaps the reason why when Yosef Halevi in the mid-19th century arrives in Ethiopia and says, wow, I've never seen Jews keep Sabbath, where Sabbath has such an effect on Jews like this, it all has to do with what happens in the 15th century. I saw two of them in, yes, we're going to keep on a little bit more from Ovadia Bar Tanura. So I saw two of them in Egypt. They are somewhat black, but not like the Cushites. It was difficult to discern. Well, we'll skip this. Essentially, he's coming and saying, much like Eliyahu Ferreira, I don't know what they are. They're this, they're that, but they're definitely, they're part of the clan, and there's something special and different. But something did change, because by the time we get to when this delegation gets to Ethiopia in the mid-19th century, what you see essentially, apart from Jews looking different, they are living a life very similar to Jews in other places in which you are living in a land of a non-Jew who is basically running the show. And where all of this changes is in the 15th century, where we have a spiritual awakening. We have, by the way, a spiritual awakening in Ethiopia overall in this time. The 15th century is where there's a great famine and wars. And so you have this kind of this literary renaissance. Many texts among Muslim, Christian, and Jews, Ethiopians, is being written. And this is essentially where the Ethiopian bookshelf is compiled. We know that previously there was the Torah, or written in Qes, and we had the 24 books, but it's only in the 15th century that we begin to gain. We have manuscripts, texts, which interestingly are shared by all religions in Ethiopia, apart from one. There's one text that Ethiopian Jews have that is unlike anything that we have, and it doesn't exist among other tribes or religions in Ethiopia. And that's a text called Tazaz Senbat, the Law of Sabbath. And I'd like to, at this point, read a passage. I'm tempted with the time we have, whether I go to the story. Yes, no, I want to read a few passages from Tazaz Senbat, which is essentially, it begins with this midrash or legend of creation, but it's very different to anything we've ever read before. It's a legend of creation that at the beginning doesn't seem to have anything to do with the Sabbath. It has to do with God and angels and a kind of rebellious angel that doesn't want to do what God says, and it doesn't seem connected to Sabbath. And we're going to connect the dots. So I'm going to bear with me for a moment. I want to read just so that you get a flavor of this. This is actually a text that, as we speak, so this text was translated for the first time into English by Leslie Wolf, a Yale University publication. I think in the 50s, maybe 59. The only issue is that Leslie Wolf's translation is based on a flawed manuscript, and since then, we found in Israel, with the Ethiopian Jewish community, new manuscripts that have tradition going back to families of spiritual leaders that complete the gaps. So there's a new edition that's coming out literally as we speak, but I just want to read a few passages, and I prefer to read them out as opposed to sort of sharing them on the screen, because it's just a lot of text. And you could even close your eyes if you want. I just really want you to get a feel of it. So this is how Tazaz Senbat begins. And this is a book that appears for the first time in the 15th century. According to tradition, it's a monk called Abba Tzevra who is not Jewish. He becomes a Jew, and he then creates one of the biggest spiritual revolutions in Judaism, and the Jewish Ethiopian community associate the writing of Tazazah Sanbat with him. And one could argue that more than anything else, perhaps only second to the utter will to return to Zion, to return to Israel, it was the Sabbath that saved Ethiopian Jews. It was the Sabbath that kept Ethiopian Jews proud and Jewish. So this is how it begins. Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, the God of all spirits, the master of all flesh. This is the book of the root of creation. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. And God completed all of his work. On the first day, he created the light. On the second day, he created yada, yada, yada. And afterward, he created man on the sixth day. And God completed all of his work on the sixth day and rested on the seventh day. On the sixth day at midday, God alone considered creating man. He called his angel, whose name was Gabriel, and sent him to earth. Here, what happens in our story is very perplexing. God sends an angel to earth to bring soil from earth. And the angel Gabriel goes to earth, requests to take some sand, but she trembles and begs him not to, and says the divine name. And Gabriel, being so scared of the divine name, goes back to the Lord empty-handed and says, I'm sorry, I failed you. I didn't do what you wanted. And God says, don't worry, you passed with flying colors. Right? The test here is to see that there's one boss. It's me, God. You went, the earth said my name. That's what I wanted to check. Another angel goes down. God sends. Same story, yada, yada, yada. God forgives. Then there's an angel called Barnael. And Barnael rebukes these two angels. You failed God. You can't even do one simple thing. God asks you to bring some soil. You can't do it. He says, God, send me. I'll go bring you the soil. And God says, fine, go. Barnael goes down, and earth, like with the others, trembles and says, please don't. And she says the divine name, doesn't help. He grabs sacks of land, holds it above his head for 7 years, right? Comes back to God, and God, of course, is furious with Barnael. Long story short, he turns him into hell. He turns Barnael into hell and says, you know what? You, the one who thinks you're messing with me, you're the essence of what is evil, what is problematic with the potential world to be. You're where the sinners are going to go. And God doesn't say this. He just says, you're turning into hell. He turns him into fire. Lashes him, turns him into fire. And then what happens is a negotiation, right? I'm fast forwarding. A negotiation between Barnael now is pissed off. He's in hell. And he starts negotiating with God. And he says, you know what? You're going to create the Jews, right? You're going to create people, and they're going to sin. Whoever sins and doesn't create full repentance, full closure, send them to me. Let them burn with me. God says, fine, you got it. What we discover in the continuation of Tazazah Sanbat is that, and this is fascinating because I don't know this in other texts, according to this tradition, God already on the third day creates hell. Meaning before this episode happens with Barnael, God already understands he's creating hell because people are going to sin, and you need this form of purgatory to allow the souls to refine themselves towards the happily ever after, eschaton. And anyway, they keep arguing, and okay, and that's what Barnael gets. And then we go, the tale goes back to the creation of man. And there's the whole tale that we know about man and Adam and Eve and the snake. And then the angels come to Adam and say, look, it's going to get bad for you. Do yourself one favor. You're going to have one moment to say one thing to God. You get to ask, like with, Genie, you got to ask for one thing. Just ask for the Sabbath. Don't ask any questions. Just ask for the Sabbath. Do that. It'll be okay. And we don't really understand why the angels, that know what's happened with Barnael turning into hell, wanting to get all the souls of Jews that sin, and everyone's going to sin. Why do they come to this simple Adam and say after he sinned, just ask for Sabbath as if everything's going to be okay. What then happens, and this is what I'm going to read you now, is the continuation of the text where we then understand where the Sabbath comes to life. She is a living, breathing person. There is a midrash where we are told, this is like a midrash for, Reform, conservative, Orthodox, right? The ones that the rest of the Jewish world go with, and that is that primordially, before God creates the world, who is God's lover? The Torah. But as we're about to discover, according to Tazazes Sanbat, the primordial lover of God is not the Torah, but Sabbath herself. And this is the reason why the angels said to mankind, you want to ask for something, plead for Sabbath, because she's got your back. And so our story continues. And then we are told, right, so the next part begins with the book of Israel and the commandments of the Sabbath and the greatness of glory in Sabbath, and we're told about how Sabbath is created. And then we get into this dialogue between Sabbath and God. And this happens just after we're told that all those that transgress, that they're going to hell. For whoever has many sins and transgressions, the Sabbath shall save him. All who honor the Sabbath and the appointed times the Lord shall honor in heaven, like a ship laden with cargo, which could not be moved due to its heavy load. But when relieved of its burdens, it sails swiftly. So too will it be a person burdened with sins if he prays and seeks grace on the Sabbath of the Lord. Right, so here we have this double meaning of not only is people who keep Sabbath like a sort of ship, without cargo sailing smoothly, but also that's what's going to protect you later. And the Lord said to Michael, the chief angel, go down to hell and bring me the Sabbath. And when the Sabbath rises at the right hand of the Lord on Friday morning, the angels of heaven shall rise with it. They shall surround it and praise it and glorify it and honor it and bow before it. And they shall tremble greatly before it. And they shall descend to the heaven at the ninth hour. Right? What we have here is this primordial Sabbath where we might not always feel it. But there's a huge festival going on in the heavens at the time of Sabbath because it's like this bridal canopy. All the angels are going to get the Sabbath as she comes towards her lover, God. And then here's the dialogue. And Sabbath said before God in the primordial Sabbath, hear me, my great creator, my king. Listen to one request. I was with you when you created the heavens and when you established the earth in your wisdom, which, by the way, tells us that she was there with God, with the whole story with Barnael. She was there before everything. And when you established the earth, I was with you when you created all the creations in the heaven, in the sea, and the earth, and the rivers. So too, heed my request. And on the day of the Lord's reproof upon mankind, the Sabbath shall stand at the gate of hell in the valley of judgment, and the Sabbath shall say, as the Lord lives, the righteous shall not be separated from the sinners until I separate them for my sake. Right? Well, what's the Sabbath? Sabbath is coming and saying to the Lord, I know you made a deal with Barnael, but I'm your lover. I was there before everyone. So do me a favor, before you send them to him, let me have dibs. Let me decide whoever thought of Sabbath, who kind of had a special place in their heart for Sabbath, and they come with me. And God basically says, your wish is my command. And what's interesting in Tazazes Sanbat is that we then have a list of commandments in the Sabbath. And it's not exactly the same as the list that we have. It's in fact a list that appears in the book of Jubilee. Now, one of the odd ones, for example, so there is a positive commandment, or it's become traditional, right? One of the big do's on Sabbath is the sort of, moment of intimacy between husband and wife. The Zohar has a field trip over this. This is super important. In Tazazes Sanbat, if a husband and wife sleep together on Sabbath, death by a heavenly court. If you get angry on the Sabbath, death by a heavenly court. If you think about mundane things on Sabbath, death by a heavenly court. The list and stringencies that separate and set apart the Sabbath are so great that culturally, religiously, we are talking about something that is radically different to what we know of. And so the point here being made, because I just want to give us a flavor of the text, is that Ethiopian Jewry for millennia, but for hundreds of years since the medieval era, the significance of Sabbath has been utterly different to Sabbath for the rest of world Jewry. That's not to say Sabbath has not been important, but for Ethiopian Jewry, it has literally been, right? The story being told is Sabbath was there with God before everything as opposed to the Torah. Think about what that means when you think about the position of Torah and the rabbi who teaches Torah as opposed to Sabbath and God. It's very different. And think of the rabbinic revolution and who owns the Torah and who teaches you Torah. And what happens when one story tells you it's God and Sabbath? The plot thickens. Have any of you ever opened an Ethiopian prayer book? I'm willing to put money if anyone in this room has opened an Ethiopian Jewish prayer book in their life. Now, I have yet to find an audience where someone tells me they have, where someone let alone has one. I'll tell you why it's so important. And it connects to Tazazeh Senbat. Because the whole way you're wired is completely different. Open any prayer book you want. Conservative, Reform, Orthodox, Reconstructionist, doesn't matter. You know what it looks like? It looks like what happens if Aristotle became a Jew. It is linear. It is a ladder of ascent. It starts from the beginning and it goes from the morning to midday to evening. It has logical order. If you open an Ethiopian Jewish prayer book, you discover that the prayer for Sunday is inspired by the first day of creation. And the prayer for Monday is inspired by the second day of creation. And so on and so forth. When a person dies, the prayer you pray is inspired by the sixth day of creation, when humans are created. It's cyclical. It's biblical. It's creational. Both pray. And yet there is no connection whatsoever between the Ethiopian Jewish prayer book and the prayer book that we have. Notice what I'm doing here. I'm saying that conservative, Reform, Orthodox are so much more similar than we ever think. And what we're not tapping into is what we should be. Is Jews who before the Talmudic revolution really make things sensitive. Right? Imagine, because it becomes very sensitive for a rabbi in the 21st century, an Orthodox rabbi, to you have an Ethiopian Jew, he's kosher, you've got the Bible, you've got and you come and say, you know what, I circumcision, that you circumcise on Sabbath? That's not what it says in the Torah. That's what your rabbi said to you. So the eighth day, but so if it happened on Sabbath, you do it. But according to me, no. Sabbath's before everything. You move it day before, day after. Don't you even think you can circumcise on Sabbath. The ramifications are huge. It's a completely different mindset. So the prayer book is different. The texts that are being studied, the meaning of Sabbath is different. The history, the self-perception of heroic Jews who stood their ground. And then when they were crushed, they reformed themselves spiritually in order to, in the late 19th century, they've still got it. I want to conclude with two little stories just to show you how wild the difference is. And here we conclude, because hopefully the point is made, because we've gone through history, text, and story. Okay, make this brief. There is a famous Hasidic story about the Baal Shem Tov, where one day the Maggid of Mezrich comes to the Baal Shem Tov and he says to him, I want to understand one of the portions in the Zohar about the Torah portion of Mishpatim. It's about, slavery and all sorts of other stuff. I don't understand it. The Baal Shem Tov says, no problem. What you need to do is you need to go on a hilltop at the sort of, the outskirts of Mezrich, and you're going to wait there until 6 o'clock in the evening. You're going to just stay put, look at what you see, and when you come back, report to me. The Magi does this. He goes, he waits. In the morning, he sees this very well-off Jew on a carriage. There's this beautiful riverbank, and he notices how the Jew stops on one of the banks of the river. He gets out of his carriage. He has a shluf, and then he gets up, and he continues on his way. Except the Maggid notices that his pouch of gold coins he's left on a tuft of grass. In the meantime, another Jew comes by, looks sort of, pretty poor, and he wants to have a rest. It's already midday. He's tired. Can't believe his luck. He's just found a pouch of gold coins, and it belongs to no one because it's out. Whoever had it already has given up on it, so he takes it. And the Maggid's watching this. He can't believe it. One Jew just lost money. Another Jew's just found money. He's taken it. Third Jew comes along. It's already towards the evening, and then he has a bit of a rest. And the first guy comes back, the rich guy that lost his wallet, and he wakes up this poor guy that's fallen asleep, and he says, "Have you seen my wallet?" And the guy says, I don't know what you're talking about. I just wanted to have a bit of a rest." He beats him to a pulp until his soul departs his body, because he can't accept the fact that this person didn't take his wallet. And the Maggid is watching this. He can't believe. He goes, shocked, traumatized. 6 o'clock, he goes back to the Baal Shem Tov, and he says to him, he reports everything. Now, just please explain to me, and how does this have anything to do with the Torah portion of Mishpatim? Now, the Torah portion of Mishpatim in the Zohar is all about reincarnation. So that's in fact what the Maggid is asking the Baal Shem Tov. He's saying, just explain to me how this works. And the Baal Shem Tov says, relax. So this is what it was. The guy that dropped his wallet and the guy that found the wallet, they were business partners in a previous reincarnation. One day they have a business dispute, and they go in front of a judge, and the guy that was meant to gain the money lost the money. And so the guy now that found the money was the guy that was supposed to, in the previous reincarnation, gain the money. And the guy that lost the money gained the money when he wasn't supposed to. Everything's fine. But the Maggid says, but what about the guy that was murdered? That was the judge. He couldn't wait to get on his lunch break that he didn't really think of the facts, and he passed him the wrong way. So God gave it to him, right? He deserved death because look at the sorrows he created. This business partnership was broken apart. Hearts were broken, and the Maggid gets it. Okay, moving on now to so this is a famous Hasidic story. It's told in several variants, at least 2, if not 3. It's published in the book of stories about the Baal Shem Tov. So we're talking like the early, like 1810, I think, is when it's published, and the rest is history. One day, I'm looking through different Ethiopian Jewish folk tales, and I come across the following folk tale. So we have one day a landowner who hires the services of a shepherd. And when he finishes, using the shepherd, he lets him go, and he doesn't pay him what he deserves. And the shepherd goes, and he's very upset, and he goes on his way. What can he do? In the meantime, the landowner, he's off to his next business enterprise, and he sits under a tree in the desert on his way somewhere, and he goes for a sleep, and he drops his pouch of money. And he, wakes up, and he heads off, forgets his pouch. Continuation of the day, lo and behold, the shepherd who was owed money comes under the tree, finds a pouch of money. Guess what? It's what's owed to him. Wow, amazing. Takes the pouch, heads off, his lucky day. Third guy comes. By now you already know the story. Third guy comes, goes for a shluf. First guy comes back, wakes him up, shakes him, "Where's my money?" Didn't take it, beats him to a pulp, dies. Then we're told that above this tree, where all this is happening, there is a monk. And this monk is watching down on what's going on. He's shocked. And he looks up and says, God Almighty, how can you judge the world like this? How can you let this happen? And God says, shush, you don't understand anything. I know exactly what's going on. And then God explains to the monk, those two were business partners. And he owed him money, and so now he didn't want to give him, so I made sure he'd get exactly what he needs to get. And the guy that died, and then he gets into this explanation that the guy that was killed was the killer, or was the baby within. He gets into some dispute of like a previous, not a reincarnation story. This idea of simply like, someone from that family killed someone from another family, and so it's just that's it. Now scores are even. Now, as you're aware, these stories they're the same mold, and yet they could not be more further apart. Because in the Hasidic story, where we all come from, so to speak, who do we go to? We go to the rabbi. If we have a problem, we go to the rabbi. The rabbi has all the answers. Doesn't matter if it's a rabbi, a rebbitzin, the rabbi has all the answers, and this is why we call Moses Moshe Rabbeinu. We've even turned Moses into a rabbi. And notice that the prism through which the story is told is the rabbi / Baal Shem Tov telling the Maggid, this is where you're going to go, this is what you're going to do. Whereas in the other story, not only is it that the monk talks to God, but notice how I told the story, and this is how it's told. It begins without any of us even knowing about the monk, as if the very oral tradition of the story wants the reader to decide for themselves between you and the creator what you think happened. And only then you discover the monk and God, and it's God Almighty. I'll conclude with this because we've run out of time. About a year ago, I meet so I've been researching Ethiopian Jewry for a while, but it's about a year ago that I meet Qes Maseret. He's the son of the son of who was the Kohen Gadol, the high priest of Ethiopian Jewry in Israel, in Beersheba. And I ask him, what's the difference between, I grew up with Jewish parents and I studied Judaism, and what's the difference between your Judaism and my Judaism? Like, with a smile on my face. And his answer simply, I'm still thinking about this. Great people can say one line and that's it. And he came and said, you call Moses Moshe Rabbeinu, and I call Moses Moshe Nevi'enu. For me, Moshe is the prophet. I don't try and make up the rules as I go along. There is a chain of command that goes to God, and you have rabbis. And that means individuality, and that means you get to interpret the Torah and create these newfangled variations and go where you go with it, and I'm somewhere else. And so if I close circle here, the different stops we've taken and understanding really just brushstrokes, broad brushstrokes of Ethiopian Jewish history and of a text, of Tazaz Senbet, and connecting a little bit to the prayer book, and then tying that into to this story and these different variants and what we understand. I hope the case has been made that we don't know much about Ethiopian Jewry. It's usually sort of on the outskirts, sidelined, and yet I can't stress this enough. I think it's one of the most fascinating but also important and foundational points that have to be better understood as we continually grapple with what it means to be Jewish. So that's the story. Feel free. I know, I'm sorry, Alex, I've taken up time, but I'm, if anyone has any questions, that's, feel free. It's now on the Valley-based Midrash time. I'm good to continue. So thank you all very, very much.
Thank you so much. Yes, very, very interesting. I know we're a little bit over, but if we might have time for one question, if anyone has one or would like to make a comment or ask anything, please feel free to raise your hands or write anything in the chat. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Johnny. I'm not going to take up too much of your time. Do I call you Rabbi Johnny or Johnny?
No, my wife doesn't let me be a rabbi. I'm just Johnny.
Okay. Anyway, I'll just congratulate you on the speech. Reminded me of Australian rule speech giving. It is filled with power and entertainment, and I loved it.
Oh,
Thank you.
thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. And you can learn about all of our upcoming classes on our website. We've got Rabbi Shmuly's series every Tuesday. And thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Chag Sameach.